Okay, fine. I guess I'm ready to do another episode. Fine. If
Okay,
I have
fine.
to be, fine. We're going to do it again.
Let's do it live. We'll do it live.
We'll do it live.
Have you seen
We've
that
quoted
video?
that a few
I
times,
know.
and like we need to post a link to it in our show notes.
I do that all the freaking time, and people that have never seen it they're like, "What is wrong with you?"
Abby's
Do
losing
it
her
live.
mind.
We'll just do it
We'll
live.
do it live. Fucking thing sucks. It's just
Do it live.
Oh my god. Okay, I'm gonna post a link to it so that everybody in our audience can get all caught up. I have
Good.
friends who quote things that are really funny, but having grown up fairly sheltered, I never know if someone's quoting something funny or just being funny. You know, every now and then someone will say something and I'm like, that made me laugh. I wonder, did that come from you or something that I missed?
Right. That's a good point.
Okay.
My dogs are, they might be giving it up. Here we go.
Oh, hi, dog. Which one is that?
Olive.
Olive. It's 2 episodes in a row we've started with that dog. We should interview her.
Seriously, we should. She'd love that.
If it happens a third time, that's our rule.
Yes.
Welcome to the True North podcast, where 2 practicing light workers get together every week to continue an ongoing conversation about wholeness and healing for body and mind so that you can follow your true north back to your true self. I am Ryan.
And I'm Abby. Hello. Yes. Follow your true north back to your true self. Here we are.
Sometimes I do something right for so long that I start stressing myself out about the odds increasing, that the longer I do it right, the closer I am to my next mess up.
Has it become that, all words just left my head.
I love when that happens. Make some new ones. Let's
Conscious
see what
competence, where like you just say it and you just know it so well, you just say it without even thinking about it, and then you start thinking about it, and that's what fucks you up. Like that's what would
just thinking about it, period.
Yeah.
Because when I'm thinking about it, what I'm thinking about is, every word that I say, I'm closer to the next inevitable mess up. Like, it's like if I was walking a tightrope, every correct step, I'd be like, well, if I'm going to fall at all, I just got one step closer to the fall. Like, it's a matter of time now. Mm-hmm. And so the more I get on a roll with something, the less trust I have that there's more roll left.
Which is interesting because right at that point, you should have, like, the practice. You should have the quantity to, make it a quality thing.
That's why my philosophy is just make the mess up happen on your own. At least then you're in control of it.
Yes. Isn't it, do you remember the mural on the wall in the play schoolroom?
That's where most murals are.
The YMCA.
You know what's weird is I'm just realizing I don't remember any walls at the YMCA.
Oh my God. Well, that's true because you were there mostly during the summer and we were outside.
Yeah.
No, there's that schoolroom and there's a mural on a wall.
On the wall. Sure, it wasn't one of those floor murals.
No, but there's a flaw in it. But it's an
no.
intentional, and I think this is what I've heard. Don't quote me on this, but it's some Native American group that believes like when you're making art, it should not be perfect, so they intentionally put a flaw in it.
Ah.
Is that kind of
I like that.
like, isn't that fun? You just get it out there.
I had a friend who got a sports car and was just marveling at it and just loved this thing, and you could tell he was just pouring so much of his like identity, like he felt better about himself because he had this car. And I was like, you need to fucking scratch that. Like right now, just get out your key and put like on the wheel well, somewhere that like it's not obvious, but you know it's there. Why on the earth? Like, why would I do that? I was like, because eventually this thing's gonna get fucking scratched.
Yeah.
And you have one choice, whether that's gonna be under your control or something that happens on accident. And I know the first time this thing gets nicked, you're gonna lose your shit. So you can circumvent that whole thing by being the person who did the first scratch, so that the transition from pristine to scratched is your own intentional doing. And then the next scratch, it's like, well, it was already a scratched car. He didn't listen to me. And then it got scratched.
And then it got scratched,
And then he literally said the sentence. Well, he lost his shit, but then he actually said the sentence like, "Now this is just a normal car." like he had just this moment of transparent authenticity where his interiors just came out in their perfect whole direct form, and I was like, see, that's exactly what I was talking about. Scratch the car the day you buy it is my philosophy.
Scratch the car.
The more you like it, the more you should just do a little
The more you like it. Yeah. Okay. That's
My first
good.
car, I
That's
didn't
good.
really care about at all, and my brother literally carved my name into its bumper with a sword, and I cared not.
Wait, what? Your
Yes,
brother?
that did happen. You know my brother.
Yeah,
This should
right.
not surprise you.
The sword part, that's not even the part that surprises me.
You chose to carve your
most
name?
people might say, wait, what? A sword? I was about to say, wait,
No.
what?
No.
He did that to your bumper?
Yeah, my brother definitely carved my name into my bumper, or his name, or
Interesting.
something.
Interesting.
But I was just like, I don't care.
Okay.
Also, there are better things to talk about than scratching cars on
Sure.
people's precious,
There are.
valuable podcast driving time.
Mm-hmm.
We made an agreement. We made promises to ourselves that we would talk about transitions. And so I'm going
Yes.
to transition into why we hate transitions.
Okay. Let's do it. Transitions. Yeah. Oh gosh. Somebody must be at the door. Those dogs are going crazy. Hello, welcome to my house. Transitions. Yeah, they're in it's funny. Like even after we said that last week, I've had so many examples of the resistance to transitions. And are we saying that transitions and change are the same? Are we going to talk about those interchangeably today?
Oh, well, that's a good distinction to start off with. When I'm thinking about transition, I imagine it like walking through a door from one room to another room.
But
like one room
into a room
has-
that you've been in before.
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe a one that you haven't.
Or both.
Yeah, those both would be transitions. But it's like when you're in one room, it's all walled off. You know what's in there. You know what's not in there. There are parameters. There's expectations, et cetera, et cetera. You're used to the color. You're used to the function of the room. And you go into a new room, and it's a new function, a new set of walls, new colors, new stuff, new things. But then also there's also stuff that room is and stuff that room isn't. And this all sounds like I'm just stating a lot of obvious stuff, but I've learned that a transition into a room you've never been into kind of feels like stepping out of your house and then into the ocean.
Not just the
And that's
outside
where-
world, the ocean.
Just like, and you can't swim.
Okay.
Like,
Oh,
like,
wow. Okay.
That's transitioning into the unknown feels like that to me.
And
which
that
then makes
feels like
it really
change.
understandable why
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I don't want to do this. But then you can be in a room and there can be change happening in the room, but you're still in that room. You can paint the walls, you can rearrange the furniture, whatever. And then that's change that happens, but you haven't transitioned. You know, it's like a
Interesting.
transition where your whole person was there and is now here, and it's a whole new set of things that are surrounding you. That's how I would make those distinctions.
Okay, I'm looking up transition for official definition. A passage from one state, stage, subject, or place to another. Change is what it is saying.
A change.
A
Great.
change, yeah. An abrupt change in energy, state, or level. That's in science.
Abrupt. Did you say that's in science?
Yeah, they're talking about like the energy of a nucleus.
Okay. I'm just going to start saying that. Oh, that's in
molecule.
science. I'm not talking about science. All of science.
I'm not talking about science today.
That's in the science room.
Talking
Let's
about
transition
people.
into... Yes.
No, but I don't know, because I use that word interchangeably a lot, and then I just started thinking, I don't know, maybe you think about that as something different. And I really like how you're explaining it, how you can move from one room to another room, but you can still be within the same room, and that within that room things change. You know, so then there has to be in that regard there is something different. So I wonder if transition then is that moving from one cycle, like season of life, cycle of life to the next, and change is something else that happens. I don't know.
I
See,
think change is constant. Like
Yes.
every 7 years, you're a different bag of molecules. And
Right.
even if you do everything you can to preserve the status quo of your life, you're still changing. Like you're never not changing. And I think that's maybe why I'm drawing that distinction, because you can live a decade and never transition
yes,
in your life, but there's still a change that occurs.
yes. Well, I'm thinking about the acorn seed. You know how it's just constantly growing.
Yeah, at no point does an acorn ever seem to transition, really. Maybe like over the lifespan of it, you'd say, oh, you were this and now you're that, so obviously a transition happened, but at no point did it just like overnight become something different. I would say then in that situation, a transition would be when you uproot the sapling and pot it somewhere else.
Somewhere else, exactly. Yeah. Interesting. This is interesting because I've never pulled these two words apart, and now that's totally thrown off my game. But we did say
You're welcome.
we did say last week that change. I think the reason why people struggle with change so much is for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're pretty much with change, there's always a loss. And I think that's the part that we have a tendency to overlook is that when something is evolving, when you are shedding something, whether it's a relationship, a job, a state of being, anything, it can be a positive change. It can be something good, but there is still a loss. There is still something that will no longer be there because of something new that has to take its place. And so I think even when people are excited about change, I think they don't realize, that or understand the feelings that they have sometimes when they get caught up because that there is actually a loss. And we don't always talk about that when we talk about change.
Yeah, and that's where I think a lot of the fear can come in. There was an episode, I think it was actually episode 26, because I had someone mention that, and I went back and re-listened to it. I was talking about a transition that I need to make and how there's a loss, but one of the things that you mentioned was that was the loss of a negative thing, or I would be losing something that I need to lose. And so we were kind of going back and forth on, is it really a loss?
Yeah.
I think the word loss then we kind of equate with something that we have negative or uncomfortable feelings about. Loss of a job, loss of a loved one, right? You wouldn't say, I lost that toxic friend. Technically, like mathematically you do, right? It was still subtracted from your life, but there is a loss, and the other side of that coin is that there's almost always a gain. And I think the difference is there's known and there's unknown. We feel like we know what we're going to lose. We don't feel like we know what we're going to gain. And so there's a clinging on to what we know simply because what you know is something that you're more comfortable in, and what you don't know, there's an uncomfortable.
Right. So, and that's exactly what I was about to say, is that's kind of my second point why I think people struggle with change so much. And it is because of that. It's not that what we had before was so much better, but it's just much more comfortable because there's this uncertainty of what's coming. And so I had to tell you about this really crazy study that they did, that these researchers took this group of people, they split them into two. And in the first group, they said, you are definitely going to receive a painful electric shock. Oh, no. And the second group, they said, you have a 50% chance of receiving a painful electric shock. And so then what they found out, kind of what they determined in these two groups of people, is the people that knew they were going to get this painful electric shock, they were fine. Like nothing really changed about their mental state, how they operated, how they showed up. It's just like, okay, yep, I'm going to get shocked, right? But the group that had the uncertainty of whether or not they were going to get a shock became incredibly anxious and agitated and incredibly uncomfortable. And so they were wanting to study uncertainty and like how it affects and impacts people's mindset and even, their physical health over time if you sit in a constant state of uncertainty. And I feel like in a way that's kind of what we're saying, that, change about, not knowing, that uncertainty of not knowing what's coming, even if we can anticipate it might be something good, it's going to produce feelings of sort of anxiousness.
That is so that could spin off into so many different directions, because then I would love to see among those who were told there would be a 50% chance. What would happen if some of them never got the shock? Would the anxiety just be perpetuated? And then when they did get a shock, was there a sense of relief just because now the thing happened? Because then that goes back to, oh man, now all the words just fell out of my head. Well, that goes back to known and unknown, right? The anxiety comes in the not knowing.
Yes.
And that's more painful than the actual painful thing. Right? The shock was painful, but at least it happened. And that can go back into, we tend to put knowing and controlling in the same bucket a lot of times.
Yes.
Because you want to control something so that you can turn it into something from unknown into something known via your control, right? So then, how often do people control a situation into something that hurts just for the sake of, at least I know this type of pain,
Right.
At least I'm familiar with this type
Exactly.
of hurt. At least I can deal with this because I've dealt with it before and I survived and I know it.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though people know that their situation is hurting them, they're still okay with it because they've inserted their own autonomy and are making it happen because they would rather have predictability and control, even if that means pain,
Mm-hmm.
than
Exactly.
let go of it all and then hopefully in doing so let go of the pain.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that crazy though? Like to think that we would rather get a painful
It makes
electric
sense,
shock.
though.
It does, because we do. We always go back to what we know.
It just shows that we prioritize
Mm-hmm.
predictability, control, and the known over unpredictability, lack of control, and the unknown.
You know,
Regardless of if there's pain or pleasure or life-giving or life-sucking, regardless of all the things we say we want, these experiments like that show that the actual things we want are to control our environment, to predict our environment, to know our environment. And transition destroys all of those.
yes, it
Or
does.
at least makes us think those are all going to be destroyed.
Exactly. You bring up a really good point about control. That seems to be a problem for people. Is control.
Yes, a lot.
Yeah, no, it's but the crazy thing is we were talking about surrender not all that long ago, and that's sort of that's how you deal with uncertainty, is you actually have to just surrender to it. And that's not just giving in and just be like, oh well, I guess I'm gonna get shocked, but actually like just coming back to what coming back to what you can control, even in those moments where there's other variables outside of you that you can't change. So it's tricky.
Yeah, and one thing that's reminded me of this is totally like, it's gonna feel not related, but it's the same mechanism just transposed into a different key. This has helped me get through. I love watching horror movies, but I the ones I really every now and then I'll get in a mood where I just want to watch a scary movie. But it's not really a scary movie. What I really want to do is watch a movie with jump scares, like the ones that really dig into your head and keep you awake instead of sleeping. Like I don't really enjoy that, but I do enjoy every now and then just the thrill of something jumping out at me. And we could dig into that for a whole episode, but. There was a time that in those types of cinematic environments, you can see a jump scare a mile away. You know when it's going to happen. And in my youth, knowing that it would happen would cause me to tense up. And I'd be waiting for it. And I would be so scared of the thing that when it happened, that's what produced the reaction, right? It was just like you're just uncorking all the tension that the whole scene spent building up. And then at some point I realized that now what I do when I know a jump scare is coming is I just acknowledge that at some point something's going to jump out at me. And I find that I'm slowing my breath and I'm intentionally relaxing all of my muscles and just being along for the ride. And then when it does happen, it's still entertaining, but I don't jump. When in those scenes where they build it up, of course, then there are jump scares where like you're going on one track and then it just veers off, and then those still get me every time. But in the moments where like the person's walking through the empty room and there's a ghost in there or whatever, and then that they're all building it up to it, that doesn't make me jump anymore. And because physiologically what I'm doing is I'm acknowledging and I'm surrendering, and I'm acknowledging the fact I don't know when this is going to happen. I know that it's going to. It's not happening yet. It's going to be fine. Right. And so I didn't even like build up that muscle as a defense against the jump scare, because in a sense I'm kind of robbing myself of the fun, But I've noticed that as I continue to engage with that type of cinema, and I continue to, on this other part of myself, evolve my ability to surrender, those two have kind of merged to the point where now I just have noticed that when I know the jump scare is going to happen, I don't jump, because I've put into practice all of these things. And it's just, I don't know. That's just the first thing I thought of when you thought of surrender. It's like, that's a very real, tangible example of the difference that surrender makes. In both scenarios, the jump scare is going to happen. In both scenarios, it does. In the first scenario, the knowledge that it's going to happen, that I don't know when, made me tense, which made my reaction very visceral and sometimes unpleasant. In the second example, I still have the knowledge that it's going to happen. I still have the understanding that I don't know when it's going to happen. But I'm taking those same pieces of information and going the complete opposite direction. And then the reaction is a lot more Zen-like.
Right. You're just controlling what you can control in that moment.
And letting go of what I can't. Yeah. And just being where I am.
Yeah. I love that example. Yeah. Interesting. So, I guess this is where we should probably throw in and start talking about the actual change cycle that people go through.
Yes.
Because I think when we're talking about resistance, there's certain parts of change that we go into that we're not resistant to. It's usually just that initial moment when it happens, right?
Like last time we were talking about the hardest part of running is getting your shoes on and getting out onto the pavement.
Exactly. Yeah. But once you're out there and the change is happening, like that's where the excitement comes and you kind of move forward and do it. So yeah. So there's several different models for change out there, but the one that I work with a lot with my clients, and it's interesting, like once I studied this and really started to identify the 4 different cycles, it's really easy to pinpoint where somebody is, which makes it a lot easier to meet somebody where they are. But stage 1 is probably just the dissolving stage. It's just that when the change actually happens, and that's where the resistance really comes into play, because that's where we kind of fall apart. If you imagine, like, this is where the chrysalis turns into goo. Everything falls apart. And there's nothing that we can do about that. We can't change that. This change has happened. It's here, and there's not a lot that we can do to like when we were all quarantined last spring, we all had to just kind of stay in our houses. We couldn't change that. We couldn't go out and make the rules any different. And so you basically had to just kind of come up with something new. And so for a while, people feel this sense of loss, right? And in that case, that particular example, those were actual losses for many people. And then what happens is you start rolling into square 2. And square 2 is all about dreaming and scheming. It's like finally you've kind of gotten through this loss, through this grief, through this anger. And then you're in stage 2 where it's like, all right, here we are. This might not be so bad after all. And you start thinking about ways to like how you can make this work for you and what can you do differently. And it's like you're really kind of thinking about your plan. You're putting your plan into play, at least in your mind. And then the third square is the integration stage, where it's like you've got your dream, your plan, and now you're going out and actually doing it. And this is where, if we're talking about like the quarantine, stage 2 was, okay, wow, I finally have a lot more time. Like, what are we going to do? What do I want to do with this time? And then in the third stage, people went out and bought bikes, and they spent more time outdoors, and they started doing, video social hours and just kind of doing actual things out of realizing that they have all this extra time that they can use to their advantage. And then stage 4 is the maintenance stage, where it's like you've kind of gone through this change, come out on the other side of it, and now you're just kind of living it up. But it's really easy. This is where, we've talked about, and I just mentioned it earlier, conscious competence comes into play in stage 4. And it can kind of get us in trouble. So
first stage is, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can.
I just want to recap this because I have a way of putting things in my own words and then spitting it back out to see if they come out the same. Dissolving, and then adjusting, and then integrating, and then maintaining. Yep. Yeah. And then we're saying that the first one is the hardest one because it's a cycle, which means that after the maintenance, you have another dissolution, which then kicks the whole thing off again. Yep. Which is, maybe that's what makes it so difficult, because when you have the change, then you naturally move into the adjustment because you have something to adjust to. So then you start asking, what can I control, what can I and how do I make a new framework around this? Then the integration is that new thing becomes less about you doing actions and more about you becoming the change. And then the maintenance is then just living a life where that is the new status quo. And we tell ourselves in our heads that that's where we want to be. So that's like the sweet spot. And then when another change happens, I was talking in our call about how when I maybe this isn't as applicable. What I was going to say is like when I think I've learned something and then I demonstrate behaviors and actions and patterns of someone who maybe hasn't learned it quite as well, I make up a story that I haven't grown at all. Like I really suffer from I'm back at square one syndrome, right?
That's where that's where that comes from. Back at square one.
Right. Yeah, and it's like I had this status quo where I was on top of my shit and I was responding to things well and I was standing in my power and not giving it away and all this stuff, and then boom, I got triggered and I jumped down someone's throat. And what I'm learning to do is let go of that story, because that's what that is, right? That's saying, oh, I went all the way from 4 back down to 1, as though it's a scale that you're climbing, and then when you find yourself at 1, that means you've fallen. When really, you're just playing the same song, but you're up an octave. You're still going up. You know?
Yeah. In fact, I drew a picture on Tuesday. It's here in my notes, probably from our call, where it's like we're continually evolving from like we're going through stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's just sort of this constant loop, and we're in different squares in different areas of our life, but we're never really back at that bottom step. It's like a stair step. So yes, you may be at square one again, but this square one this time is already a step ahead, even more than the last square one, because you have new knowledge, you have new experience, you have growth, and so you're never really back at where you started.
Yes,
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of the thing I want to name here, is that it is a cycle, and that if you find yourself adjusting to a big change and not handling it well, that's a part of the process. It's a part of the process. The fact that you're not handling well doesn't mean that you haven't learned how to handle things well. It doesn't mean that, oh, I haven't learned my coping mechanisms, or I'm not mature, or whatever. It means that you are now adjusting to a new change. And that is a part of the change cycle.
Well, so that's what happened to me last weekend. I was starting to tell you that off air, and I think this is a perfect time to actually talk about it.
Yes!
Because I want to live in that sweet spot between stage 3 and stage 4. Square 3. I keep saying stage and square interchangeably, but that's what I'm talking. Between 3 and 4. That's the space I want to live in. Because I feel like in stage 4, you are less mindful about it, and stage 3 is still, if you're still implementing and you're still kind of doing it, then you are still putting into practice. That's, to me, stage 3 is that practice phase, and stage 4 is like you're just no longer mindful of it. And that's where, and when I say that's where it can get you in trouble, I said that earlier. What I mean by that is, like, because we're not paying attention, we can easily be knocked off on our ass because we're just kind of checked out, we're zoned out. It's not a bad place to be there. So I had a visit with some family last weekend, some particular family that I have a very large past with. And I went into the weekend in stage 4, let's say. Like I have practiced my tools. I know my tools. I've done the work. I've gained my personal power back, gone through forgiveness, all of that. And I've had past experiences as an adult where things have gone well, right? Like, so I go in with that expectation that this weekend is going to be fine, and all of a sudden it wasn't fine. So I went into stage 4, and I came home in stage. Okay, yep. This is probably where I just need to own it. I think I came back in stage 1. Stage 1. I kind of knocked myself on my ass a little bit by setting myself up with this expectation that it was going to go a certain way. And then there were some other factors where there was like a blizzard, a really late night, driving in it, lack of sleep. So that sort of complicated my mental state. I didn't do my protection, as Tony would say. I didn't. And so I sort of was open to being triggered. And it happened. So.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, but I don't like it. You're right. Like I came back and I'm in this emotional hangover, and I am mad as hell because I am back in stage 1.
See?
Yes.
Back. You're seeing this as 3 steps back instead of 1 step forward.
Exactly. And this is where, after Tuesday, like, this is what I love about our tribe. I was like, okay, Abby, like, seriously think about this. And this is why I made the stair steps. I am not really back. I may be in a square 1 in a new version. Ooh, there's your transition, change and transition. So I'm in square 1, but I'm not in that original square 1 when those events happened. I've transitioned to a new cycle of change. And that's what this is I'm just in a new cycle of change, which is still already steps ahead of all the others.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we just have an aversion to being in stage 1 at all ever. You know, like how many people don't want to learn a new skill because they don't want to be bad at it, as though we can just jump straight to being good at something, you know? And when you talk about these 4 stages, it is a really good picture of the, like, when your whole world is dissolving, in terms of building a new skill that you have to do to cope with this, you're in unconscious incompetence. And then when you're figuring out how to adjust, you're entering conscious competence. No, you're entering conscious incompetence. Yes. Conscious incompetence. Right? And then when you move to 3, that's when you become consciously competent. You're actively integrating. And then 4 is the maintenance is unconscious competence. And so it really sucks. The feeling sucks going from unconscious competence to then unconscious incompetence.
Yeah.
You know, like Mitch Hedberg has this, I think it was Mitch Hedberg. Someone made a joke about, like, if a tightrope walker just tripped walking on the sidewalk, that would be completely unacceptable. Like that's how I feel like. It's like, I'm a fucking tightrope walker. I should not be tripping on the sidewalk. And that's just an uncomfortable feeling. We resist that so much, and that's what change feels like. It feels like going from something that you feel like you got down and you can do to no, I can't. And that feels like you're being robbed of your power. You're being robbed of your aptitude. You're being robbed of your ability to say, I can do things, or I am mature, or I got this. You know, you don't feel like you can say that anymore. And that's a hurt to the ego.
You feel out of control.
Yes.
I felt out of control. Like I was not able to control it.
And you know what else? This is linking to something else for me, which is not something that we really talk about this on the podcast at all. But we do have some people among our audience who are in a deconstruction phase, as it pertains to, like, growing up in a Christian setting. And there's an author I just want to mention. His name is Alexander Shaia. I think he was on the Robcast like 2 or 3 times. But he has a methodology where he approaches the 4 Gospels as lenses of the same story as told through different phases of the chain cycle we're talking about. It's a little bit different. And he actually changes the order. Instead of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, he says it's Matthew, Mark, John, Luke, because of the different things that the authors bring to their approach to the whole Jesus story. But it's essentially answering the 4 questions. Matthew is, how do we face change? Mark is, how do we face suffering? Because suffering is usually our natural response to the change. And then John is, how do we find joy on the other side of suffering? And then Luke would be, how do we find a rhythm? Which then you're in a rhythm, and then you have change, and then suffering, and then you find joy. And so you know, then approaching it through that lens is, when I first heard that, it kind of blew my mind, because one of the big critiques of believing the story, quote unquote, is that it's 4 different versions of the same story, but they couldn't all be true because they contradict each other. But if you think about it, like we were talking about a couple episodes ago, how you can have 4 different people have observe the same thing and then come away with very different stories that might actually contradict each other. Look at it through this lens, and you can read a whole gospel and say, oh, this is a person struggling with how to face change as they experience this phenomenon. Another person, this is them struggling with how to face suffering as they experience the same phenomenon. And it just kind of like breathes new life into a very old text. And so while we're talking about this, if there is anybody who like is on their deconstruction journey, that may be something that you might look into as a way to kind of like get some, you know, it'll speak a language you're familiar with, but say new stuff you haven't heard. Is probably the best way to put it.
That's really interesting. I wouldn't have put it in that context. But what are the books? The first one was, you said, the second was change, suffering. The third was,
so how do we face, and this is my interpretation. Like, if you go to his website, it's called Quadratus, and I'll put a link to it where he like breaks it down, and he has books about this, and there's like a whole 4-fold journey. It's, but as I remember it, it's how do we face change? How do we face suffering? How do we find joy? And how do we find rhythm?
Find joy and then rhythm. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then transmuting the suffering to joy is a big part of what we talk about. And then the end caps of this are the initial change, and then you have rhythm, where you've integrated the change. But also, like, I don't know that there's a way around the suck of going from 4 to the next one, going from having a rhythm to realizing that that rhythm is now disrupted by this new thing that you didn't see coming.
Right. And I think that's the question people have been asking me is, what's that magic pill to keep me from doing that? And the answer is there isn't one.
Surrendering to the fact that that's a part of the process.
Exactly. Right. That's what it is we do just have to surrender that change is inevitable. And we are hardwired to kind of look at all that negative bias that surrounds that. We're going to sit in the uncertainty of it and be incredibly uncomfortable. And until we can just sort of accept that and go back to what we can control, like you controlling your body before you're getting this, what did you, jump scare?
Jump scare, yeah.
That's, finding those things that you can do, right?
We need to get a shot collar and a randomized timer that we can't see and train yourself to just be okay with the fact that there's going to be a shock. And when you, that's not, I don't recommend that. I actually don't go buy shot collars. But, imagine being a person in that experiment that you mentioned.
I
don't
know.
Learning how to be okay with knowing that there's going to be a shock, without the stress.
I am so I grew up obviously on a farm, and I've been shocked a couple of times by electric fences, like cattle fences. And it hurts like the dickens. The last thing I ever want is to get shocked. And my father-in-law gave me this, this reminds me, I could not be in this study. Because
there's trauma.
Yes. When I get incredibly stressed out, my neck will seize up to the point where I can't turn it. And it usually happens right before our fireworks season, inevitably. Oh, yeah. And I really can't turn it. So one year he gives me this electrical pulse thing to it's supposed to trigger your muscles and then help them relax, because that's really what I needed. But the one that he gave me, he's kind of a horse trader. Who knows where he got it? I think so it was sort of malfunctioning. So it's you'd get a shock sometimes and sometimes you wouldn't. It was supposed to be like this pulse. I put this thing on my neck and I never knew when I was going to get a shock. And so I was like, well, nothing's happening. So I turned the thing up because you can adjust how painful, how strong the shock is.
How much of a shock? Yeah.
No, I lost it.
No, and then
I can't do it.
I don't mean to laugh at your misfortune, but that's fucking hilarious.
It's so funny now, but then, I'm totally in the camp. There's your surrender
trainer right there.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. It's so true.
Mine is just watch horror movies and see how I react to jump scares. Yours can make, let's see what stage I'm in. Put this thing on and see how nervous I get.
Exactly.
Oh, my God.
Please don't shock me, please.
So that's the thing. That's the magic pill is just understanding that the uncertainty and the fear and the unknown and the lack of control is a natural part of a change. And as long as you don't want to deal with those things, you're going to resist a change, even if the grass on the other side looks so green you can taste it. That's the thing. Is when people bump up against this, the reason why it's a problem that they resist change is that they want what's on the other side, or what they think will be on the other side of that change. And there are so many, I'm myself I'm that way. When I look at a big change on my horizon that I'm fairly certain is just going to happen at some point, like someone just says, hey, there's going to be a shock at some point. It's going to suck. It's going to suck for you and for everybody else, right? Seeing something like that on my horizon, I tend to try to control things. And not to avoid the shock, but maybe kind of make it suck less. That's why we tense, is because we think if we tense everything, it's your body's way of protecting itself and turning on all the armor to make then that's what ends up being the source of most of your pain and stress and the recovery afterwards, right? So I do this too. I have a huge propensity to try to control things. And sometimes it's not even in response to a change. It's just a habit. It's like last week I started telling you a story. And then I stopped telling you the story so that when I told you on air, you would have a natural reaction. And that was me trying to control you and the podcast. And then I said, okay, I'm going to stop trying to control stuff and just tell you the story. And then you took it upon yourself to control what you could control. After, I had to control what I could control, right? And so that wasn't even a fear response. That wasn't a stress response. That was just me operating as usual and catching myself trying to control something. Because it's just a reflex. It is just a reflex to try to control a thing, right? And so I'm trying to figure out how in those small moments to catch myself so that I can be mindful and notice when I'm doing it, because then that practice of mindful observation then brings me into a place where when there is a big change coming, I can look and say, oh, here are all the ways I'm trying to control this. I'm trying to make it suck less. I'm trying to put it off until I can figure out how to make it not hurt. Mm-hmm. And I'm lucky enough to have friends in my life who have sat me down and say, hey, if this thing's in your future, it's just going to suck.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's just going to suck. You know, that's one of the things my dad told me when we used to go in for shots as a kid. I'd be like, I really don't want to go. It's going to hurt. He's like, yeah, it's going to hurt. It's going to suck. Your arm's going to be sore. Mm-hmm. You're going to do it anyway. Like, just it's going to suck. There's
right.
no way to make it not suck. So just go with it.
Which is interesting because here we are then coming back around talking about expecting outcomes. Like you're expecting it to suck.
Right.
You know, like I was expecting the weekend that I would do well on my end, like be able to keep my mindset and keep myself strong. And, you know, so if you see this change on the horizon and you still go in expecting to get this negative, horrible shock, like this painful electric shock, and that it's going to be terrible, like that says something too.
Yeah. And then it's oftentimes the things you do to try to mitigate the pain are what cause the pain. Mm-hmm. Like at some point at my last job, I became pretty sure I was going to lose the job. And then I started trying to do things to control that and to try to force my will upon an outcome that was ultimately, it was kind of in my control, but it also kind of wasn't. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of the things I did to try to keep the job ended up exacerbating the problem that were causing me to think I was going to lose it in the first place. Because I saw a thing on the horizon, and and honestly, losing that job led me to some of the best things in my life that have happened since then.
Right.
It was supposed to go. I should have left that job before I left that job. You know? And so you're right. Like, you see a thing in the future, you decide it's going to suck, you try to control the suck, and then the things you're doing to try to control the suck end up making the suck happen now.
Right.
And maybe it might actually be the thing that make the thing suck later. How many people feel like their marriage is on the rocks, and so they get all desperate and clingy, and then they start acting weird and destroy their marriage?
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know? So you're right. That's a huge point. You see a thing on the horizon and decide it's going to suck. That's a choice. You can also decide that maybe it won't.
Exactly.
I didn't even think
because
about that.
Okay, let's think about the painful electric shock. Like it doesn't have to be painful, right? I know and that takes a lot of work, but let's just talk about Wim Hof, the Iceman, and how much like body work he does and breathing and whatnot so that he can go out and sit in these crazy extreme cold temperatures, half naked, mm-hmm. and not have his heart rate change, not be bothered at all mm-hmm. By it. And so, I mean, that's obviously an extreme version of somebody who can kind of control their physiology, but there are ways for things not to be painful. But I think what we're circling around here, now that I'm thinking about this, when you were talking about that, we're circling around that we're spending a lot of time not sitting in the present moment, because if we're in the present moment, there isn't an uncertainty in the future, because the future is here. It's now. Like we're just living and we're letting what be right now. And so
yes.
I think we are also saying that this resistance to change simply means that we are not being present.
It all comes back to presence. Every single episode, we come back to presence. Yeah. One of the pieces of feedback I got from someone who stopped listening was like, you just have the same conversation every time. I'm like, we say that in the fucking intro. Two practicing light workers continue an ongoing conversation. Like, we're only circling 5 topics over and over. That's what people keep coming back for. And one of those things is presence. I'm okay with that. And so, like, and that's not another thing that you mentioned was like, what if this is how one of these people learned that they actually there's something pleasurable or exciting about an electric shock?
Right.
You know, like my parents, their consequence growing up for us telling a lie was they would give us a little jalapeno out of a jar, and that's how I learned I like spicy food. So that
didn't work for you. See? Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't deter me from lying at all, and then it became there was this compounding deception because I had to pretend to not like the jalapenos because if they found out that I liked the jalapenos, I knew they would switch to soap.
Yeah.
And so then the very act of accepting the consequence of the lie was a lie. And it totally backfired on them, but I learned something about myself in the process.
Funny.
And so you tell yourself this is going to suck. Maybe it does for 90% of people. That doesn't mean that that's going to suck for you.
Exactly.
That is so fascinating. I was taking notes to try and like cut down the post-production time, but I am so in this conversation right now. This is blowing my mind.
Well, good. I'm glad. No, I just, yeah. I just kind of pieced that together myself just because I'm so frustrated. I talk about so much on this show about not attaching outcomes. And I went into the fucking weekend attaching an outcome. I did the very thing I tell people not to do all the time because I thought it was, good, right? Like, and attaching an outcome is just attaching an outcome. Doesn't matter if you think it's going to be a good one or not. It's still not just letting be what's going to be.
Well, that's the first time I make my therapist laugh a lot. And the first time she made me laugh was I was talking about how I was, remember when I was trying to hack my physiology to learn how to be okay with expected things not coming?
Yes.
I was talking about how I was talking about how I was trying to do this. And she said, you're trying to hack your way to releasing your expectations of outcomes. And I said, yes. And she goes, what outcome do you expect from this? And I was like, oh, you got me. That's the thing. Like pursuing releasing yourself from outcomes isn't really something you can pursue because it's an outcome you're pursuing. And it's just like, let go of, and it's like, it's almost like the magic bullet is understanding that there's no magic bullet.
Right.
That's just all there is. It's just be present. There was something else that you said a second ago that reminded me. Oh, I mean, another real world example, other than like a 7-year-old learning he likes spicy stuff, is I have a friend who recently went through a divorce and was really worried about the divorce for all the reasons that people normally worry about a divorce sucking for people. And one of the big things was the kids. Post-divorce, found out the kids were sleeping a lot more soundly in one parent's home because the things that were causing the divorce were no longer on their plate to deal with, right? And so they had to go through that process to find out that this divorce was better for the kids. But it's so easy to, before that, tell yourself it's going to suck for them because that's what our culture says, right?
So how long do we push off change? Because for that very reason, how long do we push off change? Because like this, and this is a very small example, but there are 2 light bulbs upstairs in my house right now that are out, and it's a dark hallway, and it's driving me crazy. And but then I think about it, I'm like, well, I'm gonna have to drag the ladder all the way upstairs. There are these special floodlights. I'm not sure if I have enough. Like I go through this whole thing, and so I just keep putting it off. But every time I come upstairs and turn on the lights and it's dark, I go back to it. Drives me crazy. But when the minute that I do it, the minute that I actually drag it out, get the special light bulbs and put them in, and all of a sudden there's light again. There's a change. It's like that relief that you're talking about. Like, and then I go into this headspace of like, why did I not do this sooner? And it's like that's such a simple thing. I mean, I know some changes are harder, especially like if you're thinking about a divorce or something like that. That's a bigger issue than changing a light bulb. But how long do we put change off just because we're suffering in our head?
Yes. And Tony Robbins has this quote. Well, there's a quote that the internet says is by Tony Robbins, but with how many times people quote Oprah for things, I don't. There's just a quote that's out there, and I can find the attribution in the show notes. But it's simply that change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of the change. Which that's not new. Like that's been circulating, and everybody hears it. But that's kind of like that's the thing. There's a pain of stasis, and that's a real pain that you experience, and there's a perceived pain of change. And like we've said a few times now, it's a perceived fear. You don't know that it's going to hurt as much as you think it's going to hurt. And by the way, little disclaimer, I'm being in my audience's business, but I'm not out here saying like, oh, divorce is great for kids. This specific situation, the kids are better. There may be times that it just fucks up your kid. I don't know your life, but just, but you don't either. That's the thing. Like you don't know pre-divorce what life would look like post. That's the point I'm making. And that's the thing. It's like you have a perceived pain assigned to the thing that you believe is in your future. And you have a very real experienced pain associated with the status of things in the present. And the tipping point, mathematically speaking, is when even though the change looks painful and scary and like you can't control and you can't predict and you can't know. When you take all of that and that still seems to hurt less than the present moment that you're trying to change from, it becomes very easy to just up and do it. Mm-hmm. It becomes very easy to just rip the Band-Aid off, but it has to outweigh.
Yes.
And so if the present doesn't hurt enough, the change is really easy to put off.
Exactly. Yep. I did that for many years in very terrible relationships. And until those got really bad, nothing happened, right? I stayed.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like, we can't judge ourselves if we want something and we don't do it, because like that's just, you're basically saying like, you operate the way human beings operate. Like all you're saying when you say I haven't made the change yet is, oh, I'm a human. I have a human physiology, a human brain, human nervous system, human fears, and that's fine. We all do. That's all part of it. Mm-hmm. There's another version of this. Not another version, but I think a more poignant way to say this is, this was something that one of our tribe members said on our call this last Tuesday, was, we are often more threatened by the possibility, take two. We are often more threatened by the possibility of a relationship with others changing than the possibility of our relationships with ourselves remaining the same. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that I noticed in you when you were talking about how you were at 4 and you felt like you dropped down to 1.
Okay.
The evidence that it's growth, that it's forward movement, is that yes, you were angry, but you were not angry at the person that you were triggered by.
Correct, yeah.
You were angry at yourself for giving away your power. Mm-hmm. The fact that that's what you were focused on shows that your relationship with yourself is continuing to evolve.
Sure, yeah.
And that has nothing to do with the other person who did the triggering.
Right.
You haven't said once that you were upset about whatever was done or said to cause the triggering. Mm-hmm. That right there is growth, because I make up a story in my head that there was a time that's where you would have placed that anger.
Oh, very much so.
So you brought that home, and that's a sign of growth. That's a sign of it being a new square one.
Yes.
And so you're not even worried about the relationship about the possibility of your relationship with the other person changing. Mm-hmm. But what you're working on is evolving your relationship with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's very true. That's very true. And I think that's a big difference in what it means to have personal power. Because if I'm concerned about, if I'm back in square one with this relationship with myself, it's because I very much value my personal power and I don't want to give it away. And when I'm sitting in the business of the other person and kind of placing blame over there instead of owning how maybe I showed up, then that's me giving away my personal power.
Yes.
So. And
that's something that I think if you're going to have anger about something, that's a good place to put it. I'm not a big fan of just trying to dispel anger or judging anger or saying we shouldn't feel angry. But if you're going to be angry, not to say, oh, be angry at yourself instead of other people, because that can really easily go into self-loathing. We're also big about self-acceptance, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're going to be perturbed about how a thing went down, I find that it's the most productive from a growth perspective to be perturbed at how I showed up. Mm-hmm. And then oftentimes the reason that I show up in a way that I'm less than proud of in retrospect is because I gave away my power to someone else, or because I wasn't being present. Mm-hmm. And those are things I'm okay getting upset at. I usually set a timer and get it all out, and then I try to figure out what's underneath the anger, right? Mm-hmm. But if I hear someone upset about those things, I gave away my power. I wasn't being present. Mm-hmm. Like I'm all about. That's a good place for, I think, our anger to live.
Yeah, except, I mean, to a certain degree, like I don't want to be angry, and I was angry at myself, but not in a self-deprecating way. I guess I would just, it didn't turn into this big story of self-loathing and I'm a horrible, awful person. It was just that I didn't show up in the way that I wanted to show up. And so I let myself have that anger, but I didn't allow it to become this story and attach to limiting beliefs. And then once I got through that, so I go through this cycle. Like it's that I allow myself to have the anger because I didn't like the way that I showed up. But then I have to fall into this place of, because of self-love, because of self-compassion, and those are things that I'm also working on. I have to step back and say, okay, how did I take care of myself in those moments though? What are some other factors that are not necessarily excuses, but they're learning tools? Like, okay, clearly I need to get enough sleep. Clearly I need to not be in a state of stress, which I was driving in the middle of the night in a blizzard on a road that hadn't been in this tiny little rental car in a road that hadn't been cleared. Like that stressed me out to no end. And so knowing those things, it's like, okay, I now know that if I want to show up the way I want to show up, I have to be taking care of myself. There's certain physical factors that have to be in place. So it's important to note that, be angry at yourself as long as it doesn't turn into this self-deprecating story.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where like, if I really care about another person and a third person doesn't treat them well, I will get angry at that third person. Right. And that same thing happens if I care a lot about a person and I see them not treating themselves well. Maybe I won't get angry, but I will kind of suggest an alternative and say, hey, I love you and I would love to see you treat yourself better than this. Right. And so in the same way, what I'm hearing you say is that anger was the emotion that happened. So that needs to get expressed. We're not going to stifle it because then it's going to root itself in your body and make all kinds of problems for you. Right. But it also isn't here to stay, and it's not attached to a story, like you said. And what I read that from, because of how I know you, is that's the same type of anger. It's the Abby didn't take care of Abby. So now you're taking all three of those people, the person you care about and the person not treating them well, and those are all coming home. And you're seeing that Abby didn't take care of Abby well. And so your anger is directed at the Abby that didn't take care of the Abby that you love. So in this sense, the anger is rooted in self-love and defensiveness of self and protectiveness of self.
Yes.
And that's why it didn't attach to a story about something else or someone else or some other circumstances, because those all exist outside of the characters at play here.
Yes.
And then because you love yourself, the anger didn't stay long, because then it turns into all kinds of other toxic stuff. And it's always a blanket. So you recognize the anger, you express the anger, you let it be what it is, you lift it up and see what's underneath. And then in this case, to me, I'm making up a story that it was all just self-love, which is why you were able to just move through it so quickly.
Yes.
And I think that's a healthy model to go through, to use, whatever. I have to pee so bad. I'm going to pee my pants. Sorry, you can say stuff, but I got to go pee.
You totally left me hanging. This hasn't happened in a really long time, where Ryan ditches the show to go to the bathroom. Oh, goodness. Okay, yeah, to bring it back for full circle. Self-love, that's a really tricky one, because it is a lot easier. In this case, for me, it was a lot easier to just be mad at myself than it was to actually love myself and show myself some grace in all the ways that I did show up. To show myself grace and basically say, I know that I was doing the best that I could with what I had available to me, and that these are very deeply ingrained traumas that are triggered. And, to even suggest in my own mind that I have completely rewritten those seems just a bit egotistical. Like, that is my ego mind thinking that I have addressed these traumas and that they're completely rewritten. And so it was a very interesting experience for me, because it kind of brought me, well, I guess it brought awareness to me that I was really sitting in my ego mind about this particular situation, instead of just staying in my soul mind, which is where I would have been present. I would have maybe been able to pull myself out of fight or flight a little bit better. But I didn't, and I can't go back and change that. So, instead of being angry, I am working on the self-love piece as part of my cycle, and, just coming back to just accept the fact that it happened, and I still have the tools to make it better. But that's where we are. You're back.
I am. And one of the things that you said, because I have my AirPods.
Oh my gosh, you can hear me.
was, I also wanted to do another episode where we revisit ego mind.
Yeah.
Because we also tend to put this binary opposition between ego mind and soul mind. But what I'm discovering about myself is that there is not a part of me that is not supposed to be a part of me. And so I've mentioned this a couple times in the past, but it was always like not what we were talking about. But I do want to like dig into the merits of having an ego. And well, it's not like, you read something like Tolle and you think, oh, I should destroy the ego. It doesn't have a place at the table. But then, it's also easy to adopt this all or nothing mindset where if it's here, we should like give it the floor all the time. And is there a way to like take the ego, value it, understand that it has a role, it has a way that it keeps you safe and protected, and there are times to use it, and there are also times to not be governed by it. And, because then my question to you is, and this is something I asked to one of our tribe members on Tuesday, was can you accept the you that went to your ego mind? Instead of looking at that you and saying you should have stayed in soul mind.
Yeah. And I can say, because that's where the work that I've been doing, I'm getting closer to that, accepting that me that went to the ego mind. But it certainly takes,
which is huge.
It certainly takes work. I mean, my ego mind, in a way, I just needed to find more balance. I was just putting too much weight in it. It's not that I don't want my ego mind there, because if we can even connect that back to the confidence piece we talked about. Part of me having the confidence that I was able to even get through this weekend untriggered, that's confidence that my ego mind was kind of supporting in a way. I just needed to keep it in check a little bit more. So I definitely, that would be a fun conversation to kind of revisit. Yeah.
Okay. So I had a friend with one of our listeners. I had a conversation with a friend who was one of our listeners. I just cut out some words there. And he's the one who actually told me about episode 26. He's actually one of our listeners who goes back and re-listens to old things and takes new notes, and it's really cool.
That's fun. Super fun.
Yeah, he sent me this long text. I think I forwarded it to you.
You did, yeah.
So we talked on the phone for a while, and he gave me this incredible formula. And I don't remember where it comes from, but he's like always learning a bunch of things all the time, and it's just from one of the things that he went through. But it's a formula. It's D times V plus F is greater than R. And the way I'm going to break that down is D is your dissatisfaction with the present. V is your vision of what the future could be. So D times V.
So D is your dissatisfaction.
Dissatisfaction with the present.
Okay.
V is your vision for what things could be. You multiply those. And you would think that if those two are greater than R, which is your resistance to change, then you change. And if those two multiplied together are not greater than R, you don't change. But there's one more variable. My words are so weird. There's another variable, and that's first steps. That's what the F is.
Okay.
And it's not a times, it's a plus. Because like you said, the hardest part of change is starting. And so when your dissatisfaction with the present moment times your vision for what it could be, plus your first steps is greater than R, your resistance, that is your formula for change.
Yes.
And it's like that works for him because he's a computer guy and everything's like very mathematical. There's not a way to quantify those things.
Right.
But when you think about it in terms of that, you can kind of you can feel out ranges, you can feel out percentages, and I wonder if people would take a change that they like the idea of themselves being on the other side of, but are bumping up against resistance of pushing through to that side. Lay out this formula, plug in what you feel like the numbers would be, and see where it lands. See how you feel about it, and then you can tweak things and say, okay, well, how do I get a better vision that I'm more attracted to? Or do I have a really clear, am I being honest with myself about how dissatisfied I am? Or what would happen if I actually took some first steps and see if that pushed me over the edge, I hadn't heard that before. I hadn't heard that formula, but when he laid it on me, I was like silent for a while because it was starting to just like systematically break things in my brain and have me.
Well, I really like that because in my mind, I go to, I have a tool that can help you find out how dissatisfied you are. I have a tool that'll help you with your vision. I have a tool that will get you your first steps. Like I can help you figure this out mathematically.
We should do a part two of how Abby's tools for yes. I actually want to do that. That's that. If you have tools,
fantastic.
And I actually think now that you're saying that, I think I have an idea of what some of these are. But if we can give people an equation and give them the tools and walk people through it, there's our first training course.
There you go.
Also, we can shit.
Yep.
Okay,
I have to go pick up my son. So what are you grateful for today? I'm on mom duty.
I'm grateful for my dad.
Oh, yay.
My son turned 3 years of age, and I I'm gonna read this interaction, and it's not gonna be very long. But I found my way to it on his birthday because every single time my son hits a landmark, there's a little bit of bittersweet energy that creeps in the back door at the fact that my dad just does not in flesh and blood to experience it with me, right? Mm-hmm. And so this interaction, I screenshotted it, and this was pre-cancer. This is like before all the post-death appreciation kind of creeps in. Mm-hmm. But it was me saying to him in a chat, I've always looked at where you and mom were and wondered what it would feel like to get where y'all are. I grew up thinking that one day we'd all just be grown-ups and just talk about grown-up things. But even as a 26-year-old married creative director of a marketing agency, I still look at you and wonder what it's going to be like when I grow up. And his response was, tell you when I get there. It was like a year or so before he got diagnosed.
I love that.
And I'm so glad I saved that because I just really, really look forward to and romanticize the idea of having those types of interactions with my kid. Mm-hmm. You know, keeping him alive through just being him, just being like him, being all the things about my dad that I've inherited. And so I went through this period of just lamenting the fact that my dad would never be here to interact with my kid. But then, I mean, yeah, he is. Mm-hmm. And that's something that has turned from, it still feels like grief sometimes, but it's really turned into gratitude a lot lately. That I get to be that guy. I get to introduce my dad to my kid. I get to keep him alive and embody him, and it's just so cool. So I'm just grateful that he gave me that thing to strive to keep alive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's beautiful. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Very cool.
Yeah. What are you grateful for?
Today I'm grateful for the people that are bucking up against the resistance and having the growth mindset. I've just had quite a few coaching sessions lately, and I've just been working with some really phenomenal people that want to put in the work. They want to make some changes in their life. They want to show up better for themselves, better for the people in their world. And it's just incredibly inspiring in the line of work that I do, just to see people want to work that hard on themselves and, really have to go push through the resistance, push through the lack of control, all this stuff we talked about today. They are head on with it, and yet they're still taking those first steps and making change happen because they know that's who they want to be, a better version of themselves. So I'm just grateful for all those people that are doing that for themselves. Yeah.
That's so cool. Great.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of good stuff. Okay, so we've got next week's topic.
We got next. It's all you. You got all your tools for my little equation that one of our listeners gave us.
It's fantastic.
Oh, I will record this post. I don't think I want to pitch some stuff that our
our tribe members are doing.
But if you gotta go, I can just do a little blurb and stick it in the episode.
Cool, I do.
Cool. All right, well, until next time, thank you for loving me. Thank you for being there.
Bye.
Okay, this is me doing the blurb. Abby had to leave, tight schedule and all that, but our tribe is full of some pretty incredible people, and we share our lives with each other every Tuesday night on Zoom, and they share some of the cool shit that they're up to, and some of it's so exciting that I can't not just share it with you guys too. You guys and gals. And gender non-binary and fluid. All you humans, okay? I'm just sharing some cool shit that our tribe people are doing. That's the point. First up, Feed the Birdies. If you go to cwpencils.com, the letter C, the letter W, pencils.com, and search for Feed the Birdies. What this is it is a supply store for creative stuff, paper, crafting, office supplies, writing tools. And one of our tribe members has a line of products called Feed the Birdies, and I'm actually going to post. It doesn't have its own page on the site, but I'm going to post a URL to the search engine result page within the website as though you had searched for Feed the Birdies to find the 5 products that she has listed here. They're really neat vintage journal paper-ish type of things, and she puts a lot of love and care and individual attention into these. It's super cool. And of these 5 items, actually I'm finding out that 3 are out of stock. So get them while they're hot. They're going quick. Second, one of our tribe's people has started a group called, the Mama Collective Coffee Chat. So every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, they get together on Zoom, and I'll post the Zoom link on our show notes, where if you're a mom, it's a safe place for you to discuss all things motherhood with other people who are also experiencing all things motherhood. Another one is one of our tribe's people is a widow and has a blog called One Crafty Widow because she is also doing crafting things. And the tagline for this, onecraftywidow.com, is moving forward, not moving on. And it wasn't until she became a widow that she realized that we as a society don't really do anything to take care of our widows. There's no like systemic structural caretaking of people who have lost a loved one. We just kind of throw them to the side and say, sorry, you're without a paddle, figure it out. And so she's kind of just offering a paddle to other people who might be in a similar boat. But she has a blog post called A Woman Without a Man, where she talks about a story that she had, an experience that she had with general contractors doing work on her house as a woman who spent most of her life letting the man in her life talk for her, now needing to stand in her power and kind of like, play that whole game. And so she writes about what it's like, and it was really, really, really powerful. So head on over to that. I'll also put the link to that in the show notes because I'm just a nice guy. All right, that's it. That's my blurb, and we'll see you next time.
We are grateful for you. Thank you for listening. And if you like what we're doing and you want more, then you can join our tribe to interact with other like-minded individuals. You can go through our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/True North Podcast 11.
Is it Podcast 11 or is it True North 11?
Oh, shit.
It's in our show notes. If you want more than that, you want some more hands-on healing stuff that we do, I do actual energy healing and body work, and Abby does life coaching and workshops. And you can find the URLs in our show notes when we figure out what they are.
And we are always trying to increase our reach and bring more people to find their true north. So we would really appreciate it if you could leave a review and rate it in whatever podcast platform you use.
Done. That's perfect.
What about the gratitude?
This one. Hang on. And one last thing. What are you grateful for? There. I said it. I said the thing.